Oi, oi, welcome everyone. This is Filthy Ketchup. Welcome to this week's episode. Hold on tight. This week we are discussing the real life Dexter, the Brazilian serial killer who's killed over 100 people, who ate his father's heart during a prison riot and is a free man today and is a social media star on YouTube. We are, of course, discussing the infamous Shotgun Pete Pedrinho Matador, the Brazilian serial killer who only targeted rapists, predators, and people he had a personal grudge against. Is there such a thing as a moral serial killer? We'll see. This is Pedrinho Matador, the infamous, the famous Shotgun Pete, Petey Carcucharia. Pedro Rodrigues Matador was born in 1954 in Brazil, Sao Paulo. The little boy was lucky to be born at all, as his father was a violent alcoholic. When he was born, he already had 8 sisters and brothers, and when his mother was heavily pregnant, his alcoholic father severely battered his pregnant wife, and she went into an early labour. The little boy Pedro Filho was born with a misshapen skull. He was lucky to be born at all because his father inflicted constant domestic violence and misery on his family. It was a very, very hard life. Pedro Filho's family was not the poorest of the poor, but there were times when it was very, very hard for his mother to keep food on the table, and because his father was a violent alcoholic, a lot of the burden of supporting the family did fall to his mother and his older brothers and sisters. In Brazil, where Pedro Filho is from, family is all you have. So family is very, very important to those villages in Brazil because that's very often all you've got. He grew up on a farm located in the Brazilian municipality of Santa Rita São Paulo, south of the state of Minas Gerais. Sorry, my Spanish is excruciating. I think that's how you pronounce it. The state of Minas Gerais. Now, as I said, Pedrinho Filho's family were not the poorest of the poor, but there were times when it was a big, big struggle. The family relied on his elder brothers and sisters to support them, and all the children went out to work as soon as they possibly could. There was no running water, and the poor were often viewed as disposable, and life was very, very cheap. Many people, including Pedrinho's mother, were devoutly religious. A common saying in the area is that God must exist because the devil certainly does, and the level of violence and poverty definitely bore that out. Pedrinho Senior, the father, worked hard for a very, very meagre salary, but very often his salary would all go on alcohol and he would violently beat and terrorise his wife and the children. Manuela, the mother of Pedro, was very strict, but she was very fair. She ruled the children with an iron fist and a Bible, quick to punish and not afraid to administer beatings to her children, either to Pedro or his brothers as soon as they got out of line. Pedrinho lived a grim life with his parents and younger siblings, but he was very, very close to his grandparents, in particular his grandfather. Pedro has said himself that his grandfather was a devoutly religious and good man who taught him to be a gentleman, taught him to be a just and honest person, and it was from his grandfather that Pedro got his sense of justice and righteousness and sense of right and wrong. He also taught the little boy how to plant, how to harvest, how to hunt and skin animals. Pedrinho wrote, this is translated from the Portuguese, in his autobiography, he also taught me how to be a worthy, correct and just man. My grandfather loved me. Of all the grandchildren, I was the dearest. So he was very, very close to his grandfather. His grandmother taught him a quite a different skill. She taught him how to drink blood. She said that drinking blood would make you strong, and if you drank ox blood or the blood of a strong animal, you would take on the strength and characteristics of that animal. And Pedrinho would put this into effect later on with human blood. Apparently his grandmother taught him that if you drink the blood of a strong man, you will take on the strength of that man. Family was everything for Pedrinho, as it was for most of the poor in Brazil, because as I say, that was all you had. All the boys in the area, all the girls, in fact, all the kids, worked as soon as they possibly could because their families needed the money. When they weren't working, they were hunting, they were fishing, they were setting traps. By the age of 10, Pedrinho was killing monkeys for their pelts and fishing and hunting meat to help feed his family. By the time he reached 11 and 12, he was working in a chicken slaughterhouse, putting to use some of the skills that his grandfather had taught him. He'd grown into a tough, wiry little teenager, very, very strong, very, very tough, not afraid to defend himself. The beatings that his mum and father had given him had toughened him up into a wiry little teenager. But by far the most defining characteristic of Pedrinho was his sense of righteous justice, especially when that justice was directed at him or the people he loved. By the time Pedrinho was 13, violence was an everyday part of his life. He lived in a violent world. He came from a violent family. That was all around him. His sense of justice developed on its own. But when he was 13, his sense of justice would be tested for the very first time. He saw violence at home with his father and mother. He saw it on the streets. And he saw it all around him, and that infused his entire being. But an incident in 1967 with an older adult cousin unleashed for the first time the murderous impulse in Pedrinho Matador. He was working with his cousin, who he didn't know very well, in the chicken slaughterhouse. And he was also working part-time at a sugar press, making sugar. His cousin had a horse, and Pedrinho took it for a ride one day without asking. Now, Pedrinho Matador despises thieves. He said he had no intention of stealing the horse, he just wanted to ride it, so he took the horse for a ride and brought it back. But the cousin was angry when he found his little cousin, and because Pedrinho was small, he took advantage of his size to violently punch him in the face. Pedrinho just looked at him and said, "I'm going to kill you for that," and his cousin just laughed and then hit him again, piling humiliation on top of humiliation. Pedrinho felt that he had done nothing wrong. He had not stolen the horse, he had no intention of stealing the horse, and the humiliation he felt was excessive and unfair. He didn't want to just hit his cousin back, he wanted to kill his cousin, and the injustice festered for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. He saw his cousin several times, but there was never an apology and there was never an acknowledgement of the pain he had caused, and this would cost his cousin dearly. Others in the family, when they heard of the incident, laughed at Pedrinho for being weak, also fueling his hatred and his rage. Sugarcane was the dominant agricultural crop in the area, and Pedrinho's grandfather sometimes did shifts in the sugarcane mill, where the noisy, smelly, very industrial sort of atmosphere occurred, and there was no safety standards. I mean, this was a village in Brazil. It was very, very unsafe. It was very, very dangerous environment. There was heavy machinery. There was, really dangerous equipment like the sugar rollers and stuff like that. There was machetes for cutting the sugar cane. So it was quite a dangerous environment. Pedrinho's grandfather would get him shifts to help out the family, to help out his mum and his dad. So one day Pedrinho went to work and the cousin who had punched him was there, and they were working together feeding the sugarcane through the sugarcane press. A sugarcane press is a huge machine with big rollers that squeezes the juice out, the molasses out of the sugarcane stalks. Now watching Pedrinho standing there with his cousin feeding the sugarcane through the sugarcane press. Now as he's watching the heavy steel rollers rotating and flattening the stalks, Pedrinho Matador has an idea. He looks at the rollers, he looks at his cousin, and he thought, right, I'm going to get him now. He waited for just the right moment to calmly and resolutely grab his cousin, pinned his arms by his side, and shoved his head through the sugarcane press. And he was leaning against him with all his might, trying to get his cousin's body through the sugarcane press. Now, Pedrinho was a 13-year-old boy. He did not really understand physics. He did not understand that this is not an easy way to kill someone. All he had was his hatred and his rage, and it was a moment that he took advantage of. Now, he was surprised when his cousin's arm went in right up to the shoulder, crushed his arm, crushed his shoulder, but the body jammed up against the machine, and there was no way to get the rest of his cousin's body through. Pedrinho tried to put his cousin's skull through the sugar press, but the rollers just spun and spun and spun and spun, and he couldn't get the head through. So he was worried. Now, the overseer or the manager, whatever you want to call him, used to patrol the sugarcane presses about every 15 or 20 minutes, and he was worried that he was going to get spotted. I mean, he's using the sugar press to try and kill his cousin. So Pedrinho grabs some pruning shears and begins to stab his cousin over and over again, hoping that if he was dead it would be easy to get him through the sugar press. But obviously his cousin just remained trapped. I mean, now he's bleeding all over the place, he still can't get him through the sugar press, and now his cousin's screaming. You can imagine his cousin's screaming at the top of the voice. So he raised the alarm. All the machines were turned off. The foreman came round, turned off all the machines, and Pedrinho was arrested. He was made to spend a couple of nights in jail, but his family needed him back. They needed him back to work. So his grandfather went to the police station and said that the family doesn't want to lay charges. His cousin doesn't want to lay charges. Please let him go. We need him at work. Now, in Brazil, the police system is famously corrupt. I mean, in America or the UK, if you tried to kill someone like that, whether the family wanted to press charges or not wouldn't matter. You would still be arrested and charged. But in Brazil, you can pay the police and, they'll just kind of turn a blind eye. So Pedrinho's punishment was being made to clean the sugar press of the blood and everything of his cousin. A job, he said, that took him 4 weeks to do properly. He had no remorse for trying to kill his cousin, and would often tell the tale laughing and joking about it, saying that it gave him pleasure because he was righting an injustice. Pedrinho Matador's sense of justice and his violence would be the two most defining characteristics of his entire life, and now he knew what it felt like to kill somebody. His next murder would not be far away. 1 year later, when Pedrinho Matador was 14, a disaster befell his family. His father, although he was a brutal alcoholic and not very reliable, their family still needed his wages, what was left of them after he'd been drinking. And Pedro Sr. was laid off from his job as a night janitor at a local school with no severance pay and no wages. This was disastrous for his family, but his dad had been accused of stealing food from the kitchen and stationery from the kitchen, even though he hadn't, and everybody knew that he hadn't. Even when his father was working, him and his brothers were working, having enough food on the table was not a guarantee. There was no welfare system in Brazil. There was no safety net. If you and your children were not working, there was no food on the table and you went without. There was no such thing as welfare. If you didn't have food on the table, it was tough luck. So his family needed that job. The loss of the job meant that his family and him and his brothers went hungry, and would certainly lead to an increase in the father's drinking, which would have an even more disastrous effect. When you live in extreme poverty, the worse it gets, the worse it gets. The worse it gets, the more you drink, the more you drink, the worse it gets. And his family were caught in this vicious circle. Pedrinho Matador was 14 years old. He knew that his father hadn't done this, and that sense of injustice burnt him. He really, really hated it. Now, because his father was drinking more, he was also beating his mother more. He was also drinking more. There was no food on the table, and Pedrinho Sr., the father, knew that it was one of his colleagues, a fellow nighttime guard, who had stolen the food and had stolen the stationery, and he told his son, Pedrinho. His father had sworn to his employers that he was innocent of the crime, but he was fired and he was branded a thief. To be branded a thief in village life in Brazil, it's very, very humiliating. But he knew, and his son knew, that he was not guilty. His mother was already working as a maid and a laundress, which is very, very heavy work. She was cleaning houses all day, and then she was doing laundry by hand. There was no washing machines and tumble dryers. She was washing all this washing by hand, and then when she got back, there was no food, and she would get beaten by her husband. So you can imagine for Pedrinho, seeing all this and knowing that somebody else was guilty, it made him extremely angry. The worst part to Pedrinho was the injustice of it. It wasn't fair. His father hadn't done it, and his beloved mother, who he loved more than life itself, was suffering because of somebody else's lies. Pedrinho Matador has always said he despises liars. Those with the means to help the family out refused to listen because his father had been branded a thief. They didn't want to be caught helping a thief. So it just got worse and worse and worse. And even though his dad had worked there for 12 years, nobody was listening. So Pedrinho was fuming. He was raging. He was so angry. He went to his grandfather's house, and he went in his grandfather's shed, where his grandfather kept his firearms. Like most people in the country keep like shotguns or a couple of guns, for hunting and defending their family. So he goes to his grandfather's house. He takes a rifle. He takes loads of ammunition. Now, bearing in mind, Pedrinho's 14 at this time. This is his second murder. He gets a machete, a rifle, ammunition, and a tent. Throws it all into an army backpack, and he heads for the mountains. He goes into the mountains and he builds a little camp. Now he's camping out in the mountains, he's hiding out. He's swearing revenge on his father's colleague. He's going to get this man. But to do it, he needs to kind of stake him out. So he's got a tent, he's in the mountains. Now, this is the words for his autobiography. Pedrinho Matador's autobiography. He said, "I set up the tent and I stayed there for 30 days, 1 month. My friends there were the animals: jaguars, rabbits, snakes, monkeys. I stayed there and they were close to me, but they didn't hurt me. During my time in the woods, I killed only what I needed to eat. I never exploited the woods and I never mistreated the animals, but I did not go there to live. I had a plan. I went there for revenge. Now, this is exactly what he did. This man, his father's colleague, was the deputy mayor of the town. You know, he wasn't Joe Schmo. He was quite an important man, which was why Pedrinho was camped out in the jungle staking him out. So it was a very cold night. Pedrinho is lying in wait for the deputy mayor outside of his house. His 14-year-old fingers are clutched around a loaded 36 caliber rifle. Now a jeep comes driving up to the house with the mayor in it. Pedrinho Matador gets the rifle and points it at the window, shoots it. Now, as the shotgun rings out, the deputy mayor turns around to see what's going on and gets out of the car. Pedrinho shoots the rifle again, points it at him and shoots him point blank, killing him instantly. Then he runs. Now, at 14 years old, Pedro Rodriguez Filho, which is Pedrinho Matador's real name, he's killed a man, an important man, that's harmed his family. Now, when Pedrinho was killing chickens and monkeys and everything else, he said that he felt no compassion or empathy, but this was different. He had killed a man that had harmed his family, and his only emotion was pleasure. He felt righteous. He felt, that he had the right to do this. He felt righteous anger and pleasure. He was an avenger, and he had found his life's mission. Although killing the deputy mayor gave Pedrinho a sense of justice and a sense of pleasure, he was still seething at the unfairness done to his father and his family. His family is still suffering, and now they have to hide Pedrinho. One man could have put a stop to this: the day guard, the colleague of his father that had actually stolen the food and the stationery. If he had confessed, Pedrinho's father would not have lost his job, and Pedrinho Matador would not have had to shoot the mayor. But there was the day guard still working at the school while Pedrinho's family was starving. Now, the third time came very easy to Pedrinho. He'd already killed twice. He knew how to use the gun. This was the start of Pedrinho the Avenger. Pedrinho Cartucheria, Shotgun Pete. A month after the time when he killed the deputy mayor, Pedrinho went to the school where his father had once worked, and where, in his mind, his enemy was waiting, his father's ex-colleague. He waited in the storeroom where the guards always began their day. When the guard arrived, Pedrinho pointed the shotgun at him and made him sit in a chair in the middle of the room. Now, according to his book, his autobiography, Pedrinho had decided that before he killed him, he would explain why he was killing him, why he deserved to die, and make them understand that they had committed a wrong and they were being punished for it. Now, in the case of the thieving day guard, he looked right into his eyes and he said, "Do you see what you've done? You've destroyed my family. If you had confessed, if you had said it was me who stole that food, it was me who stole that stationery, my father would have a job, my family would not be starving. You've caused all this suffering to us, and this is why I'm going to kill you." The guard starts to sob and cry and plead, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. But the damage had been done. Pedrinho Matador was 14 years old, but he was already a seasoned killer, and he was not going to take any shit from this guy. He put the gun right at him, shot him twice, and then piled the furniture and boxes on top of the body and set the school alight. The children weren't there, the children were in the playground. He set the room alight, set the guard's body alight, and then ran away. Now, after the second murder, the heat was on. Pedrinho had to flee the village completely. He couldn't just hide in the mountains. So he goes to a big city. He goes to Sao Paulo, which at the time was, and still is, a big city in Brazil. It's quite metropolitan. And in the city, he's on the run, he's on his own, he's 14 years old, he's got no money, but he meets a woman known as Botina, or Booty, who was a drug dealer, a well-known drug dealer in Sao Paulo. She was the widow of a well-known drug trafficker, and she was a gangster in her own right. Booty had her own gang. She had her own gang of little drug dealers that would work for her. And Booty used her sexual attraction and her connections to seduce adolescent boys into working for her. She would sleep with them, and then she would recruit them into her gang. Pedrinho was 14, and he was small for his age, but he had a wiry strength. He was handsome, and she liked his mop of hair, she liked the way he looked, so she seduced him, took his virginity, and took him into her gang and showed him the ropes. Now, she lived in a place called Mogi de Cruzes. Sorry about my Spanish, it's really bad. In central Sao Paulo. Mogi de Cruzes in central Sao Paulo. Took his virginity, put him to work trafficking and dealing drugs. Now, she initiated him, she showed him the ropes. His relationship with the crime boss allowed Pedrinho to take on a higher position of responsibility in the gang, so that older and more experienced drug dealers were quite jealous of him because of his relationship with Booty. He was getting better deals, he had his own turf, he had people that were working for him. So they were jealous of him. The girlfriend of one of these older drug dealers warned Pedrinho that he had a target on his back. Now, the ambush came at a local swimming pool. There was a local lagoon where the young shotters and dealers would go to chill out. They would go sit around the pool, have a swim, maybe smoke some weed around the pool. Now, Pedrinho had been invited to the swimming pool to escape the heat and smoke some weed with some of the lads. He was walking down the hill towards the river, and he noticed that all the others were acting strangely. They weren't talking, they were trying to avoid him. So before they got there, Pedrinho pulled his gun and made the others drop their gun. He demanded to know why they were planning to kill him, but they turned and ran. As they ran for their lives, Pedrinho shot at them, killing 2 of the boys and putting the other in the hospital seriously injured. Now, whether they were a genuine threat or whether Pedrinho Matador was suffering from paranoia is difficult to say. Later on in prison, Pedrinho would be diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, so it's possible that this was just paranoia. But having said that, drug dealing in Sao Paulo was a highly dangerous profession, so there's every possibility that he was genuinely in danger. He became known from that point as Pedrinho Cartucheria, Shotgun Pete, because of his weapon of choice, a 12-gauge sawn-off shotgun. Now, nevertheless, never mind his paranoia, Pedrinho did manage to make a couple of friends. He worked with two friends, Gaucherino and Zé Capeta. I don't know if you've seen that film, The City of God. There's a film called The City of God that's based in Brazil, and it sounds to me like that film might have been partly based on Pedrinho Matador's life, because its depiction of gang life is very, very similar to the life of Pedrinho Matador. If you haven't seen it, check it out. You'll understand what I'm talking about. So him, Gaucheria and Zé Capeta all had each other's backs, quite literally. When two of them slept, one would sit up and guard them with a gun and then let him sleep, and they would take turns watching each other's backs. The three of them carried out numerous crimes, numerous drug dealing, numerous murders, there was drive-bys, there was shootings. It was an extremely dangerous environment. One crime that would come back to haunt Pedrinho was ripping off a drug dealer by the name of China. Pedrinho took an instant dislike to him, as China was a well-known bully, and ripped him off for both his money and his drugs. This decision would come back to haunt him. He had also become a prime target of Brazil's notorious death squads. The death squads are vigilante gangs of off-duty police officers who walk the streets looking for drug dealers, looking for criminals, and they're also affiliated with the state intelligence services, which emerged in the late 60s in Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. Essentially, they're just vigilantes. They walk the streets with the aim of ridding the slums of crime. Now, because of Pedrinho's notoriety, he was known as Shotgun Pete. Up and down the favelas and the slums, everybody knew him, so he had become a prime target for the vigilante death squads. Pedrinho became transient. He would sleep in his car, he would spend one night here, one night there. The only two people he trusted was Gaucheria and Zé Capeta. Now, this phase of Pedrinho's life came to an abrupt end when the Brazilian death squads, the Brazilian police, executed Booty, his boss, the woman that had initiated him into the drug trade, during a drug transaction. The police had been tipped off by Booty's enemies, and Pedrinho was also wounded and shot in the shootout. Booty was one of the few people that Pedrinho cared about, and he ran to take refuge with his family. When he arrived on the doorstep of his extended family, Pedrinho had a request. Now, this request involved voodoo magic. In Brazil, they're very, very much a religious and superstitious people, and they believe in Santeria, they believe in voodoo, they believe in black and white magic, and they have rituals, voodoo rituals, that are essentially based around blood and sacrifice. They believe that sacrifice and blood is the elixir of life, that the more you sacrifice, the more you will be protected. Pedrinho Matador had decided that the time had come for him to be protected. So he goes to his family and he asks them, "Do you know anyone that can do this ritual for me?" So the relatives who took Pedrinho in were practitioners of Paulo Mayombe and Candomblé Macumba, a religion very closely related to Paulo Mayombe, Santeria, voodoo, black magic kind of rituals. Others refer to it as psychotherapy for the poor. It's a highly ritualised belief system encompassing spirit animals, ceremonial dancing, animal sacrifice, and sometimes human sacrifice. Participants often experience being possessed by spirits, and afterwards they say they feel cleansed both spiritually and mentally, and they also feel bulletproof, like nothing can harm them, nobody can harm them, so they feel protected and spiritually cleansed. The most sacred and symbolic substance in these rituals is blood, which is thought to represent the pure essence of life. Now, Pedrinho Matador believed that undergoing one of these rituals would protect him from his enemies. Because Booty had been assassinated, he was becoming paranoid and he needed that spiritual protection. So his uncle and his aunt first sit him down, they question him, they say, "Are you sure this is what you want?" He says yes. Now, a core belief of these religious practices is that good and evil are irrelevant. It doesn't matter what you want to do with this protection as long as you understand that, fully what you're getting into. So, as an adherent, Pedrinho would be taught to fully embrace his life's purpose, whether that's good or whether that's evil. He understands that he has to fully embrace it and that he will always be protected, but to always be aware that anything you inflict on others might come back to you. This philosophy sat well with Pedrinho's own sense of righteous justice, and he agreed to undergo the ritual. Then his uncle made him get a coconut with all of its hair removed, gunpowder, a wick, a black cat, and 7 beans. The voodoo ceremony took place outdoors as required in a deserted quarry at midnight. So there's Pedrinho. He's had his hair shaved, his eyebrows shaved, and the ritual involved Pedrinho killing the cat, drinking its blood, and then being covered in the remainder of the blood and entrails whilst in a trance. The carcass was then filled with the 7 string beans, the gunpowder, the wick, and buried by Pedrinho. During the ritual, a dozen members of the cult, the practitioners, surrounded the teenager, drumming and dancing. This goes on all night long. It's the drumming and the dancing, and it sends you into a trance state. Pedrinho found himself becoming possessed by the spirits as the ceremony went on and on and on. Now, in the morning, he was exhausted, but he had become convinced that he was invincible, he was bulletproof. No matter how much people tried to cut him, no matter how much they shot him, no matter how much they came after him, he would be immune. He would be immune to bullets. He did not need to fear his enemies. He did not need to fear the death squads. So exactly 1 week later, he returns to the burial site, digs up the cat, removes the seeds, which had hardened into like little beads with the gunpowder. They'd hardened into tight little beads, and his uncle threaded them on a string and he wore them as a necklace. His uncle said, "You must never ever remove this necklace from your neck. All the time it's on your neck, you're protected." Pedrinho himself wrote in his autobiography, "No matter how much the cops shot at me, no matter how much my enemies shot at me, the bullets would not touch me. Enemies attacked, but I defended myself with ease. I was afraid, but after the ceremony, nothing could touch me. He also swore at that moment he would become a protector of the weak and the vulnerable. He would protect women from rapists. He would protect children from abusers. He would protect people who were being bullied. He became an avenger, a righteous vigilante avenger. He hijacked food trucks, took the food into the slums. He burned the shops of people who were cheating the poor. He defended women. He killed rapists. He killed child abusers. The penalty for harming an animal was the same. Whatever they'd done to the animal was inflicted on the perpetrators. At this time, he was just 16 years old, and he had become a righteous vigilante. Pedrinho then moved to a place called Campo Grande, which is a city in the west of the state of Rio de Janeiro. While he was there, he met a beautiful young girl by the name of Maria Aparecida Olympia. When Maria became pregnant with his baby, Pedrinho moved with her into a modest home, continuing his career of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. What he would do is he would rob rich drug dealers and food trucks, and he would give the money to the people who lived in the slums. And he would steal from the bad drug dealers, take their profits, and give some of it to the poor and some of it to support him and his newfound family. The legend of Shotgun Pete ran through the slums of Brazil's cities, where he came to be both admired and feared. Those he assisted or helped him, protected him, or warned him when there was trouble coming. But his body count meant that Pedrinho had become a target. He had a massive target on his back, both from the dealers he was robbing, the death squads, the vigilante police, and, loads and loads of people wanted Shotgun Pete. They either wanted the legend of being able to bring him down or the legend of arresting him. So he had a large target on his back. The sins of his past came back to haunt him when Maria was 7 months pregnant. Pedrinho's entire world fell apart when he came home to find that someone had come to his house and slaughtered Maria and their newborn child, as well as the man that Pedrinho had paid to watch them while he was out, the bodyguard. The murderers had used the blood of his pregnant wife to scrawl, "We will get you," on the wall in her blood. Pedrinho had always felt like he was a righteous avenger, appointed by God to protect the poor, but now he wanted revenge. The need for vengeance on those who had killed his pregnant wife, destroyed his chance for happiness and the son that hadn't even been born yet. He swore revenge. For more than a year, Pedrinho Matador hunted down anyone and everyone he thought might have information about the person who had done this. He tortured people. He tortured them for hours, got all the information he could out of them, and then killed them. He had murdered so many people and had so many enemies, he didn't even know where to start looking. His inquiries seemed to be going nowhere until one day he had information that the drug dealer that he had first robbed, China, was the one responsible for the murder of his wife. Now, Pedrinho Matador was convinced, after everything he'd done, after the people that he tortured had given up all their information, that trail had led straight to China. He knew China was the one responsible for his pregnant wife's death. China's ex-wife told Pedrinho that China's brother would be getting married the following Saturday in Jacquerie, the same place where Pedrinho had robbed China several years earlier. China, of course, would be at his brother's wedding. Pedrinho Matador knew this, and he laid his plans for the most spectacular vengeance Brazil had ever seen. Pedrinho recruited the same two men that he worked with at the time that he robbed China, Gaucherina and Zekapeta, and told him that they were going to a wedding. Pedrinho's orders were simple. Every man at the wedding would be killed, but no women and no children were to be harmed. He said, if any children or women get hurt, you're going to deal with me personally. Half a century before anyone had even heard of Game of Thrones, Jacquerie in Brazil had its very own Red Wedding. The Red Wedding would enter into legend in Brazil and is still spoken of today. Pedrinho, Gaucheria and Zekapeta, so there's just three of them, carrying as many guns as they can carry, crept up on the wedding party, which was huge. They were eating, dancing, drinking, unaware of the presence of the three teenagers outside who were determined to kill every single one of them. As the glasses clinked and they were dancing to the music, the trio slipped in unnoticed, pretending to be guests. The unsuspecting party was in full swing. When somebody asked Pedrinho who he was and what he was doing there, Pedrinho said, I'm an honoured guest of China. He was the one who gave me the invite. Spotting China behind him, the three burst in and overpowered China's father, overpowered China, told all the women and children to go upstairs. As the women led their children out, Pedrinho waited for all the women and children to leave the room. As soon as the women and children went upstairs, Pedrinho took out his 12-gauge shotgun, or scattergun as he calls it, and China came at him pointing a .44. Pedrinho shot him in the chest, killing him instantly. The death of China was not enough for Pedrinho Matador. He wanted to send a message to everybody in Brazil. This is what happens when you touch me or touch the people I loved. The men in the family were all gang members, and to Pedrinho that meant they were fair game. He started shooting indiscriminately, using the cache of guns he brought with him. The three teenagers shot and shot and shot until every single man in that wedding party was dead. They left behind an entire room of corpses. There must have been at least 30 men there, and every single man was shot to death. They stepped over the bodies of the dead, had a drink at the bar, and then left. 17 men were killed and 16 were severely wounded. No children and no women were harmed. This was Brazil's very own Red Wedding. And after the Red Wedding, the legend of Shotgun Pete spread like wildfire throughout Sao Paulo. This was when he got the nickname Pedrinho Matador, which translates as Killer Petey or Pete the Killer. He was the most feared psychopath in Brazil. He killed without mercy. He sought revenge for the murder of his wife and his pregnant child, and he was the protector of the poor, the avenger. He protected women, he protected children. So he had quite the reputation, and at this time he would not even have been 20 years old yet. He was about 19 years old. So according to his autobiography, Pedrinho now hooked up with a pair of twins, and they became a polyamorous threesome. So it was like he had 2 wives. He began to live the lifestyle of the rock star gangster, the cashed up gangster. He had smart cars, he had flash clothes, he had 2 beautiful twins on his arm, he had a beautiful villa. He was the notorious Pedrinho Matador, Killer Petey. He had money, he had respect, he had power. He enjoyed the fear and he enjoyed the respect. He would routinely make a habit of killing rapists, killing child abusers, killing anybody that he thought deserved to be killed. He wanted to protect his society, he wanted to protect the women and children of the slums, and that's what he did. He preyed on the criminals and he preyed on men that he thought were predators. He had lots of tattoos tattooed on his body. He later confessed that if a day went by and he hadn't killed someone, he would get agitated. He became addicted to the thrill of shooting people, of killing people. One thing that he did as well that is disturbing is he would drink the blood of his victims. As his grandmother had told him, drinking the blood of an animal or drinking the blood of a man makes you stronger. And he would make a practice of this. He would drink the blood of the people he killed until in the late 80s the AIDS epidemic in Brazil stopped him from this behaviour. Now, not even the corrupt police in Brazil could ignore this many dead people. Corpses upon corpses were piling up, and there was one name that came back to the police every time: Pedrinho Matador. The police were given no choice but to try and arrest him as soon as they could. Pedrinho took cover wherever he could, but his arrest was inevitable. Finally, he was arrested on May the 24th, 1973. He was having a drink at the bar where the father of these twins worked, his 2 wives, and the twins' father was the one who ratted him out, grassed him up to the police. He was arrested in a dramatic gunfight with the police, taken down, badly wounded, to the screams of the vigilante police death squads screaming for his death. When he awoke, he was chained to a hospital bed, surrounded by TV cameras, nurses and doctors. At age 19, Killer Petey's murderous ways had finally come to an end. Or had they? At the age of 19, Pedrinho began a life sentence in Sao Paulo. Brazilian prisons were the most toughest and the most violent prisons in the entire world. Pedrinho Matador had a huge target on his back. Most of the the drug dealers that he had robbed, relatives of the people that he had killed, were doing their time in the prison that he was in, he was given two choices: either to go in protective custody on the numbers or to go into general population. Killer Petey chose to go in general population, but he did not have an easy time. You know, at that time, the guards were sadistic, corrupt, unbelievably violent. They were packing men, 30 into a cell. The toilet was a hole in the floor. There was no running water. Disease was rife. The food was terrible. Unless you could afford to pay for your own food, you were basically starved. And there were men being killed, shanked, beaten every single day. It was a living nightmare. On the way to the prison, Pedrinho Matador was put into a prison van with a rapist on the way to the prison. When the prison guards opened the van doors at the end of the ride, the rapist had had his throat torn out by Pedrinho Matador's teeth, and he had been beaten to death. So, Pedrinho Matador hated rapists. He still asked to go into general population even after he'd done this. He knew he was going to get a life sentence, so he had nothing to lose. He beat this rapist to death, tore out his throat with his teeth, and then chose to go into general population. But the violence in the Brazilian prison system was unbelievable, even for somebody like Pedrinho Matador. Araraquara prison in Sao Paulo was one of the toughest, most violent prisons in the world. Gang warfare was marked by extreme and sadistic violence, and the guards themselves were corrupt and sadistic. They were the most violent guards in the entire world's prison system. The only way you could survive in prison is by being part of a gang. Now, Pedrinho entered prison young. He was 19. He already had a reputation for severe violence, but that reputation would be tested in the unbelievable violence of the Brazilian prison system. Now, when he was in prison, he heard as he was walking through the prison, people were turning their radios off. They wouldn't let him read the newspaper. He finally found out that his father had killed his mother. His father had always beaten his mother. Now, Pedrinho adored his mother. His mother was one of the only people on earth that he really genuinely loved, and he heard that his father had killed him. He arranged with one of the corrupt prison guards to have his father transferred to the same prison that he was in. Now, hold that thought. Pedrinho's cellmate was ambushed. Before his father could get there, Pedrinho's cellmate was ambushed. It's not entirely clear what happened next, but we know that 3 of the men that ambushed his cellmate were killed, and the other 2 wounded badly enough that they could not continue the fight. The legend of Shotgun Petey increased daily in Araraquara prison. Pedrinho was not the sort of person who was just out of control, who just could not control his rage. He was very, very calculating and methodical. Oftentimes he would befriend the people that he wanted to kill for weeks on end, and he would strike at exactly the right moment. His coldness, his methodical nature made him a very, very formidable enemy. Now, as he found out that his father was on his way to the prison, he requested the prison guards if he could go to his mother's funeral. The guards allowed him to go to his mother's funeral, and as he was standing by a coffin, he put his hand on the coffin and swore revenge. He promised his mother that he would eat his father's heart. Yeah, you heard me. He swore to his mother that he would kill his father and eat his heart. Now, he got back to the prison and he found out that his father was in the prison on the other side of the jail. Although the corrupt guards had arranged for his father to be there, they would not allow him to be in the same cell block as his son for obvious reasons. So Killer Petey acquired a knife, threatened the guard, took his keys away, took his gun and his keys, used the gun to shepherd all the other guards into a cell, locked the cell door and left the guards in the cell. He then made his way to the cell block where his father was being held. Pedrinho Matador's mother had been stabbed 21 times. As he walked in his father's cell, his father made no attempt to defend himself. He only said, "You're right, my son." Pedrinho ignored him, walked over to him, lunged at him, stabbed him 22 times, one more time than his mother had been stabbed. He then stabbed open the ribs, ripped open his chest, pulled out his still beating heart and began to chew on it. Now, he said he couldn't eat it because it was too chewy, so he cut a slice off of it and chewed that, just chewed his father's heart, but he had to spit it out because it was too tough and chewy. But he had what he came for. He took the revenge that he'd sworn to take, and he stayed with his father's body a little bit more, spat on him, made his way back to the cell where he'd locked up the guards. He released them, gave him back the keys, gave him back the gun, and allowed himself to be handcuffed and taken away. In prison, his vigilantism increased. He became the most feared man in Al-Quara prison. He would routinely kill pedophiles, he would routinely kill rapists, he would routinely kill anybody that had preyed on people who were weaker than them. And eventually he was released. A psychiatrist who evaluated Pedrinho Matador in 1982 wrote that the greatest motivation of his life was a violent affirmation of self. He was diagnosed as a psychopath, and he kept all the sort of stories, newspaper clippings, stuff like that in a big kind of scrapbook, like a typical serial killer. But eventually he was released. He had done more time than anybody else. Now, by this time, Pedrinho's official body count was 71, although a lot of people believe that it's well into the hundreds, because not all of his murders made it into the papers, especially the ones in the slums. Now, from 1992 to 2002, for 10 years, Pedrinho was kept in solitary confinement. For a decade, Pedrinho's only human interaction was with the guards, to whom he was always polite and respectful, and the journalist who interviewed him. In 1998, another notorious inmate arrived at the prison. Motorboy Francisco de Assis Piera, better known as the Park Maniac, had been accused of raping, torturing and murdering 11 women in State Park in Sao Paulo. 9 other women had also been raped. When asked about Motorboy by a reporter for a TV channel, Pedrinho said, "Today my biggest dream is to be alone with the Park Maniac. What he did should not be done. I hate rapists." Pedrinho's declaration that he would kill the Park Maniac made headlines all over South America. The director of the prison had to release a statement assuring the public that, no matter how popular the idea was, Pedrinho Matador would never get a chance to kill the Park Maniac. Pedrinho was kept completely isolated, spending 23 hours a day alone in his cell and using the exercise yard alone. The director of the prison said, even if Pedrinho can get out of the cell, he will not know where to find Francisco. In addition, everywhere he goes, he is always accompanied by prison guards. On December 17, 2000, during visiting hours, an inmate of the prison opened fire on prisoners from a rival gang with a gun that had been smuggled in. Amid the ensuing confusion, the prisoners rioted. They took control of the facilities and took 23 hostages, including 4 guards. During the standoff, Pedrinho Matador managed to escape his cell. During the time he escaped from his cell, after the riot, the Park Maniac was found in his cell, cut to pieces. He had been killed, but the prison authorities tried to cover it up by releasing a statement saying that the Park Maniac had not been killed because they feared the media circus. So they had to release a statement saying that he did not, he didn't kill the Park Maniac, but it is undisputed that he was actually killed during that riot. Pedrinho Matador has not said whether he's killed him or not. So in the early 2000s, the authorities came together and decided that because Pedrinho Matador had spent so much time in prison, he should be allowed to re-enter society, to have parole. He was evaluated by numerous psychiatrists who said that he showed no remorse and he was a typical psychopath, but that he was also capable of living in society. Now, in the year leading up to his release date, Pedrinho Matador became an exemplary, perfect inmate. But he would be released. He was released in the early 2000s. Pedrinho Matador was released on the 24th of April 2007 after serving 34 years in prison. He was released out to fend for himself. He was not given any kind of reintroduction into society. He just had to work it all out for himself. Everything was completely foreign to him. He needed help for the most simplest of tasks. He was completely institutionalized. He didn't know anything about technology but he did become very religious, and he eventually readjusted to society. However, he was rearrested for murder. He was locked up again and he was released on December the 6th, 2017. He was 64, but he still looked youthful, thanks in part to a strict diet and health and fitness regime. And Pedrinho Matador embraced social media. Social media made him a star. Today, Pedrinho Matador is one of the most famous YouTubers online. He's been called the Dexter serial killer. He's repeatedly interviewed about his crimes. He's very honest about his crimes. He talks with fluency and articulation. He taught himself to read and write during his last prison stint and is now literate. And now he's on social media. He's become the vigilante Brazilian Dexter serial killer. He is a prolific uploader. Sometimes he uploads several videos every single day. He's got 4,200 friends on Facebook. He's had all his prison tattoos covered up with proper tattoos, and he has repeatedly said that he wants to leave his Shotgun Pete reputation behind. He uploads things like cooking videos, interviews, videos on advice to teenagers, saying that they should not disrespect their elders. He does like advice videos, publicity videos. When he's out and about, he's often stopped by the police, but the police are stopping him for pictures and selfies. He's got millions of fans online, and he has adjusted as well as he can to a modern society. Pedrinho Matador is perhaps one of the most fascinating serial killers in the world because of his social media celebrity, because he only targeted people that he considered to be predators. But it does have to be said that Pedrinho Matador is a serial killer, whether he was justified or not. However you justify it, you do not have the right to take the life of another human being. That is a fact. Even though he only targeted predators, even though he was justified in what he was doing, he has never shown any remorse. He said he will never show any remorse. Now, Pedrinho Matador lives a quiet life. He lives on a farm with a dog, and he says that he's cured. He says that he wants the legend of Shotgun Pete to fade away, and he just wants to live a quiet life. Pedrinho Matador is a quintessentially modern killer. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so grateful to all my new subscribers. Thank you. Whatever you're doing today, please be happy, please be blessed. Thank you for watching. Thank you. Bye.